This isn't about birds. It's about something watching you and understanding you better than your own government. What if your face, your habits, your secrets were being archived, not by AI, not by satellites, but by something older, quieter, and already everywhere? What you're about to hear was recovered from a defense contractor's decommissioned drive. It wasn't peer-reviewed. It wasn't published. It was scrubbed. Because it worked. Field audio, spectrogram logs, and memory-mapped behavioral recordings began under an ecological grant. At least, that's how it was filed. But the equipment came through DARPA-adjacent channels, and the results never left the black site. They weren't watching forests. They were watching cities, parking garages, airfields, rooftops of buildings connected to infrastructure systems, places where crows gathered, places where humans moved predictably. The stated goal was behavior mapping. The real goal was threat assessment. And what they found wasn't bird behavior. It was surveillance architecture. We already knew crows could use tools. We knew they could solve problems, recognize faces. That was the public version. What changed everything wasn't what they did. It was what they said. High-resolution field mics were deployed across 14 urban nodes. Audio was logged around the clock, year-round, across crow generations. And when the audio was run through machine learning, something broke. Because crow calls weren't just noises. They were structured, predictive, contextual, compressed. Not signals, packets, discrete units of encoded meaning, with headers, with modifiers, with latency timing. This wasn't ethology. This was network intelligence. The first clue came from what researchers labeled observer calls. A specific tone was emitted when humans entered a zone with equipment. Not movement, not noise, intent. A person walking with a phone, neutral. A person standing still with optics, observer call. A person holding a directional antenna, observer call with modifiers. But here's the thing, it propagated. One crow issued the call. 2 blocks away, another responded. 5 minutes later, rooftops activated. No line of sight, no visual confirmation, just acoustic transfer. Fast, efficient, coordinated. This was not panic. This was not fear. This was communication. Someone finally asked the obvious question. If they are sharing identity, if they are tracking behavior, if they are classifying intent, who is building the database? Retired field analysts saw it first. Not students, not lab techs, veterans. People trained to recognize patterns before patterns become threats. They noticed something the scientists did not. The crows were not reacting to what humans did. They were reacting to who the humans were. At first, it was dismissed as noise, coincidence, anomaly. So researchers ran controlled trials. Humans were rotated in randomized sequences, posture altered, gait adjusted, facial coverings added. The calls stayed consistent. One subject triggered the same call every time, regardless of movement, expression, or direction. Another subject produced a different call with the same consistency. It was not behavior, it was identity. That is when they realized the model had been wrong from the start. The crows were not signaling there is a threat. They were signaling who the threat was. And it did not stop at recognition. It evolved. When machine learning models mapped these calls over time, a deeper pattern emerged. Crow call sequences weren't random. They were stable, structured, shared. A call made 5 years ago still triggered recognition in a new crow population. That is not memory. That is persistence. A crow encountered a human it had never seen and responded with the call its parent had used years earlier. This wasn't instinct. This wasn't trial and error. This was inheritance, not genetic, not behavioral, cultural, auditory, operational. In other words, the crows weren't just learning. They were building a system. One crow can identify a human. A second can remember them. But a third, who has never seen them, can act based on shared intelligence. This wasn't reaction. This was coordination. Calls became packets. Packets became logs. Logs became a network. Not just signaling, routing. That was when researchers stopped asking, "What are they doing?" and started asking, "What are they running?" But that wasn't the worst part. Because when the audio was decoded further, something appeared beneath the signals. A new pattern, quieter, hidden, almost deliberate. The first real test wasn't planned. It happened during a routine field simulation in a mid-density urban quadrant. Controlled chaos, simulated infrastructure failure, emergency vehicles on a timed route, human response teams briefed. Everything followed protocol, except the crows. Before the first alert hit human responders, the crows moved. Rooftop clusters broke formation. Observer calls pulsed across 6 city blocks. Perimeter groups shifted inwards. Strategic repositioning. No panic, no flight. Just cold, coordinated response. What happened next forced a Homeland Security audit. The Crow network's response time was 42 seconds. Human systems took 4 minutes and 27 seconds to mobilize. Trained intelligence officers were outpaced by birds. That should have ended the study. Instead, it escalated. Analysts flagged a specific call, previously labeled observer. Now it came with modifiers, duration markers, threat probability, attention levels, cadence shifts based on intent. They were not signaling danger. They were cataloging motives. One human ignored the crows completely. Another observed casually. A third held a camera. The language changed instantly, not gradually. Instantly. Not danger, not neutral. Watcher. The observer call was not a call. It was a header. And what followed was not noise. It was classification. One analyst annotated the line that changed the tone of the entire program. Human intent detection. That is when the silence began. Not absence, discipline. As if something new. We were listening. It started in what analysts called zone echo, a medium security perimeter surrounding a telecommunications exchange. Equipment detected no audio, no calls, no chatter. But the crows were present, watching, still, silent. That was not a lack of data. It was the data. Because when crows go silent, it means the system is shifting modes. In human security doctrine, this is called discipline. Suppressed communication during threat scenarios, meaning only internal channels remain active. One researcher suggested it casually, half as a joke. Maybe we are only hearing the civilian layer. The room went silent because it fit too well. Everything decoded so far was rhythmic, repetitive, surface level, and it always happened in low-risk areas. Public spaces, parks, rooftops. When sensitive environments were introduced, the network went dark. In human systems, operational silence implies 2 things. There is a secure communication layer beneath the noise. You do not have clearance to hear it. The sounds we had been decoding were not intelligence. They were cover traffic, chatter, civilian signal, the visible layer. The real channel is still off-grid. That is when funding tripled and access narrowed. Certain locations were removed from study. Urban relays, infrastructure choke points, military-adjacent rooftops. Because someone realized something uncomfortable. Crows were not just present near human systems. They were embedded inside them. Not nesting, positioning. Church spires, radio towers, logistics depots, These were not habitats, they were nodes. And then came the footage. Not of a call, but a playback. A human played back a known threat classification call without the human present. The crows responded instantly, meaning the call did not describe a threat. It was the threat. The playback test was supposed to be harmless, a calibration run, a baseline check. But when analysts replayed a danger classification call without the dangerous human present, the crows mobilized anyway. They repositioned, they signaled outward, they engaged entire blocks. The sound itself carried authority. That was the moment researchers understood the mistake. The calls were not reflective, they were not descriptive, they were directive. Not, there is danger, but respond as if danger exists. This was not communication. This was command propagation. Animal communication does not do that. Human communication barely does that. But distributed intelligence networks do. And if crows are running one, then the vocal architecture they use is not language. It is protocol. That realization brought in a new phase of testing, one that many researchers privately opposed. They inserted humans into crow-populated zones, not to observe the birds, but to see how the birds observed them. 3 subjects, same route, same posture, same timing, but different intent. Subject A ignored the crows, Subject B observed casually, Subject C monitored with recording equipment. The crow responses diverged immediately, not gradually, instantly. Tone changed, cadence shifted, modifiers stacked. The network was not reacting to actions, it was reacting to mindset. And nothing in biology explains that. The leaked annotation from a senior bioacoustics analyst said it plainly: human intent detection. That phrase alone should have stopped the program. Instead, it escalated again. If the crows could detect intent, could they detect hierarchy? Researchers sent groups of humans into the zone. Sometimes the leader issued orders. Sometimes they walked silently. Sometimes the group dispersed mid-route. The crow responses changed every time. When humans acted as a coordinated unit, the calls elevated. When one human directed others, the packets compressed. More rapid, more structured, more urgent. Any intelligence that recognizes hierarchy understands power. And any intelligence that understands power understands strategy. That was the moment researchers realized something horrifying. We were not studying them, they were studying us. And the tests we designed, they had already run on us. Because humans were not the watchers anymore. Humans were the test subjects. The next breakthrough didn't come from a lab, it came from a correlation. Researchers overlaid crow call patterns with urban activity data, garbage schedules, shift changes, traffic flow, patrol rotations, and the calls adjusted before those changes occurred. Not in response to noise, not to motion, but to time. The network wasn't reactive, it was predictive. Pattern recognition? Yes. Memory recall? Definitely. But this wasn't adaptation. This was forecasting. In one test, researchers replayed archived crow audio from 3 years prior. The modern crow network responded appropriately. Without drift, no loss of meaning, no semantic decay. That meant the crow language wasn't just stable, it was persistent across generations, which meant memory wasn't local. It was distributed. Crows began vacating zones 8 to 12 hours before scheduled military drills. No published alerts, no troop movement, no visible signals. But the crows moved anyway, before the noise, before the lockdown. That isn't instinct. That's forecast logic. Collapse anticipation. But the most chilling data wasn't about movement. It was about stillness. In areas of high government signal surveillance, crows weren't just present, they were silent. No call packets, no mobbing, no alerts, just a blackout. And in human systems, silence during instability means control, suppressed bandwidth, prioritized traffic, quiet before a move. The analysts started calling it catastrophe logic, not because the crows caused collapse, but because they optimized around it. They didn't try to prevent disasters. They tried to survive them, reposition, restructure, reallocate. While humans tried to respond, the network had already moved on. That's when one analyst wrote the line that nearly shut the project down. This isn't behavior tracking anymore. It's post-collapse modeling. A network that can forecast failure doesn't try to save you. It prepares for what comes after. And then came the reputation transfer. The moment everything researchers thought they understood broke. The final experiment was not designed to test morality, but that is what it revealed. One subject had already been flagged by the Crow network. Long-term threat calls sustained over months. No change in behavior could reset his classification. The other subject was clean. No alerts, no observer signals. A neutral actor. They were asked to walk a fixed route together. No equipment, no eye contact, no engagement, just proximity. By the end of the route, the neutral subject's classification had changed, not based on action, not based on appearance, based on association. The crow calls escalated. Observer calls updated with modifiers. Tone shifted, urgency spiked, guilt by proximity, threat by adjacency. This was not animal response. This was network-level logic. Reputations were not stored individually anymore. They were shared, updated, distributed, assigned collectively. The network had moved from memory to judgment. This is exactly how human intelligence systems behave before a confrontation. Classify targets, assign threat multipliers, flag unknowns, but more importantly, collapse ambiguity. In a stable system, you can be neutral. In a collapsing one, you are either useful or you are not. That is when researchers stopped talking about animal cognition. They started using phrases like distributed judgment, adaptive containment, hostility forecasting, because the system was not reacting to instability. It was mapping its perimeter. And the most disturbing realization was not what the network was doing. It was what it was not doing. It was not warning us. It was not engaging. It was not retreating. It was waiting. In the final phase of the program, they were not decoding crow calls anymore. They were monitoring silence, specifically silence in areas where calls used to exist. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. It was still structured, still pulsed, still intentional. That is when one technician noticed the pattern, not in audio, but in spectral space. A non-call, a signature. Not noise, not silence, something between. And in that signal, there was no threat call, no alert, no observer modifier, just presence. That is when someone in the lab said it, not out loud, not officially, just whispered, "They're not studying us anymore." It was not defeat. It was not disengagement. It was conclusion. The calls had stopped because the questions had been answered. Everything worth observing had already been seen. Every test run, every variable explored, every deception cataloged. This was not about crow intelligence. It never was. It was about scale. About a network that had always existed. We did not create it. We did not shape it. We just noticed it. Too late. And if they have already reached their conclusion, maybe we were not supposed to hear it at all. What else is watching and has already decided?